I'm Brooke Wilson, 34, and what should have been a beautiful 10th anniversary dinner with my husband Jason turned into a nightmare when his father Harold slid an envelope across the table with a smug smile. "A special gift," he announced. Inside were divorce papers, already filled out in Jason's name. The entire restaurant fell silent. Jason's face drained of color. Harold looked victorious. Little did he know, I had my own envelope ready. Before I tell you what was in my envelope that left Harold completely speechless, drop a like and subscribe if you've ever dealt with toxic in-laws. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Jason and I met during our junior year of college. We were partners in organic chemistry lab, both struggling through the course but finding comfort in our shared confusion. He was the quiet, thoughtful type with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled, always bringing me coffee before our 8 a.m. classes. I was immediately drawn to his gentle nature and the way he listened, truly listened, when I spoke. Our relationship blossomed naturally, moving from study sessions to coffee dates to falling asleep together while watching documentaries in his cramped apartment. By graduation, we were inseparable, planning our future together with the optimism that only comes with youth and deep love. The first time I met Jason's parents was during Thanksgiving break of our senior year. His mother Susan seemed pleasant enough, if a bit reserved. But his father Harold, I still remember the way his eyes assessed me, like I was an investment with questionable returns. During dinner, he peppered me with questions about my family background, career plans, and financial prospects. It felt more like an interrogation than a getting-to-know-you conversation. "So you're studying marketing? Not much money in that unless you get with a big firm," he commented while passing the mashed potatoes. "Jason's going into architecture. He'll need someone who can support that kind of career path." Jason squeezed my hand under the table and later apologized for his father's behavior. "He's just protective," he explained. "He came from nothing and built his business from scratch. Money and stability are everything to him." I tried to understand. After all, everyone's parents have their quirks, right? I didn't realize then that this wasn't just an awkward first meeting, it was a preview of the next decade of my life. Despite Harold's obvious disapproval, Jason proposed after graduation. We had a beautiful September wedding, though not without Harold attempting to control every aspect of the planning. He insisted on reviewing vendor contracts, questioned my choice of venue, overpriced for what you get, and even tried to dictate our guest list. Jason stood his ground on most issues, but I noticed how these confrontations drained him, how his shoulders would tense whenever his phone displayed Dad on the caller ID. The first 2 years of marriage were blissful despite the occasional interference from Harold. We lived 3 hours away from his parents, which provided a healthy buffer. Jason's architecture career was taking off at a respected firm in the city, and I had started building my event planning business, specializing in corporate retreats and conferences. We were young, in love, and building our careers side by side. We saved diligently and purchased our first home, a charming 3-bedroom craftsman that needed some TLC but had potential written all over it. Weekends were spent painting walls, refinishing hardwood floors, and planting a garden in the backyard. We hosted dinner parties where our friends would bring bottles of wine and we'd stay up late playing board games and dreaming about the future. Everything changed when Jason was offered a significant promotion, one that required relocating closer to his parents' neighborhood. The opportunity was too good to pass up, a senior position at a prestigious firm with creative control over projects and a substantial salary increase. I supported the move wholeheartedly, believing we could handle increased contact with Harold and Susan. I even thought perhaps time had softened Harold's opinion of me. I was wrong. Within weeks of our relocation, the dynamic with Harold shifted from occasional annoyance to regular intrusion. He had a key to our new house for emergencies before we'd even finished unpacking. He began stopping by unannounced, often when Jason was at work, to offer unsolicited advice about everything from our landscaping choices to our retirement planning. The first major conflict came 6 months after our move. Harold showed up while I was working from home and began questioning our financial arrangements. "Jason mentioned you keep separate accounts," he said, helping himself to coffee in our kitchen. That's not a real marriage. You should be pooling everything. Unless you're planning an exit strategy? When I explained that we had both joint and individual accounts, a system that worked perfectly for us, he scoffed. My son works 60 hours a week at a prestigious firm while you plan parties. The contribution hardly seems equal. That night, I tearfully recounted the conversation to Jason, who confronted his father by phone. Harold apologized, claiming he was just concerned about our financial future. Jason seemed satisfied with this explanation, but something in Harold's tone had sent a clear message to me. I wasn't good enough for his son, and he wasn't going to let me forget it. Over the next few years, a pattern emerged with Harold. He would intrude, overstep, or criticize. Jason would defend me or set a boundary. Harold would retreat temporarily, only to return with a new angle of attack a few weeks later. His tactics were varied and relentless. He would drop by our house uninvited, usually when Jason was at work, to check on things. These visits inevitably included pointed comments about my housekeeping, career choices, or the way I organized our home. Those curtains block too much natural light, or your home office is cluttered, no wonder you're not landing bigger clients. Harold's financial advice became a constant source of tension. Despite both our careers flourishing, he spoke as if we were constantly on the brink of financial ruin. He questioned every purchase, from our furniture to our car, suggesting alternatives that were always more practical, less expensive, and completely devoid of joy or personal style. Susan, Jason's mother, presented herself as the peacekeeper, but I gradually recognized she was enabling Harold's behavior. She would call after particularly tense interactions to smooth things over, saying things like, "You know Harold means well. He just shows love through guidance." Or, "He was hard on Jason growing up too, it's just his way of pushing people to succeed." I tried every approach imaginable to improve the situation. I read books on difficult in-laws, practiced responses in the mirror, and even consulted a therapist for strategies. For a time, I tried the kill them with kindness approach, baking Harold's favorite desserts for family gatherings, asking his advice on topics he enjoyed, complimenting his business acumen. The kindness strategy earned me brief periods of peace but never changed the underlying dynamic. When kindness failed, I attempted creating clear boundaries. I told Harold directly that unannounced visits weren't acceptable and that financial discussions should include both Jason and me. This approach earned me the label of too sensitive and controlling. Jason's attempts to mediate were similarly ineffective. He would speak to his father after particularly egregious incidents, and Harold would behave for a few weeks before sliding back into old patterns. It became clear that Harold didn't respect boundaries unless they came from Jason, and even then, compliance was temporary. When I suggested family therapy, Harold laughed outright. "Therapy is for people with real problems," he said. "Not for families having normal disagreements." The situation reached a breaking point at a dinner party we hosted for Jason's birthday. We had invited several couples from his firm, along with Harold and Susan. The evening was going smoothly until Harold raised his glass for a toast. To my son, he began pleasantly enough. 33 years old and already a senior architect at Mitchell & Associates. "The house is beautiful, the career is soaring." He paused, his gaze sliding meaningfully to me. "Now all he needs is to start a family before it's too late." Some women get so caught up in their careers they forget what's really important. The table fell silent. Our friends stared at their plates, embarrassed. Jason's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tightly. What Harold didn't know, what no one knew except Jason and I, was that we'd been trying to conceive for over 2 years. I'd suffered 2 early miscarriages that had left us both heartbroken. The fertility treatments, the disappointments, the grief, we'd decided to keep it private until we had good news to share. That night, after everyone left, I broke down. "I can't keep doing this," I told Jason. "Your father deliberately humiliates me, especially in front of others. He has no idea what we've been going through with trying to have a baby, and I'm glad we never told him because he would have found a way to blame that on me too." Jason held me as I cried, apologizing repeatedly for his father's behavior. "I'll talk to him again," he promised. "This has to stop." But I knew by then that talks wouldn't change anything. So I began documenting everything. I started keeping a journal of Harold's comments, the date, time, and context. I recorded particularly inappropriate phone conversations, legal in our state with one-party consent. I saved emails and text messages where he criticized me or attempted to drive wedges between Jason and me. I wasn't sure what I would do with this evidence, but the simple act of documenting made me feel less crazy, less alone with the gaslighting and manipulation. During this time, I found unexpected support in Kayla, a friend whose mother-in-law had tried to sabotage her marriage for years. "Document everything," she advised over coffee. "And make sure you're talking to Jason about how this is affecting you. The moment you start keeping your feelings from him is the moment Harold starts winning." I took her advice to heart, making sure to have regular, honest conversations with Jason about the situation. These conversations were difficult. Jason was torn between loyalty to his father and love for me, but they kept our marriage strong even as external pressure mounted. Still, the constant tension was taking its toll on us. Date nights were interrupted by calls from Harold about urgent matters that were invariably trivial. Holidays became battlegrounds of passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled insults. Weekend plans were hijacked by sudden family emergencies that required Jason's immediate attention. Our once rock-solid relationship was showing cracks, hairline fractures that worried me more with each passing day. The year leading up to our 10th anniversary saw Harold's behavior escalate from merely intrusive to actively destructive. It began with small incidents that could be explained away as accidents or misunderstandings, but gradually grew into a pattern that was impossible to ignore. In January, I had spent weeks preparing a major presentation for a potential client, a corporate retreat that would have been my biggest contract to date. The night before the presentation, Harold stopped by while Jason was working late, ostensibly to drop off some tax documents Jason had requested. Somehow, during his brief visit, my laptop was accessed and the presentation file was deleted, along with the backups on my desktop. Harold claimed he'd just moved the mouse to see if the computer was on when I'd stepped away to make coffee. I had to stay up all night recreating the presentation from scratch and earlier drafts in my email. I landed the client despite the setback, but the incident left me shaken. Harold's innocent act didn't ring true, especially when he called the next day to ask how the presentation went, his voice carrying an undercurrent of satisfaction when I admitted it hadn't gone as smoothly as I'd hoped. Then came the investment debacle. Harold convinced Jason to invest $15,000, nearly half our savings, in a friend's business venture without consulting me first. The startup was developing an app that Harold insisted would revolutionize the real estate industry. Jason, eager to please his father and excited about the potential returns, transferred the money before even mentioning it to me. 3 months later, the company folded, taking our investment with it. When I expressed my hurt over being excluded from such a major financial decision, Harold told Jason I was controlling the purse strings too tightly and stifling his financial independence. This led to our first major argument as a couple, with Jason eventually acknowledging he should never have made the investment without our mutual agreement, regardless of his father's pressure. The failed investment seemed to open Jason's eyes to his father's manipulation in a way nothing else had. For the first time, he began to question Harold's motives and recognize patterns I'd been pointing out for years. This new awareness only made Harold double down on his efforts. By summer, Harold had started spreading rumors within the extended family. Jason's cousins, aunts, and uncles began making odd comments at family gatherings about how some women just aren't meant to be mothers and asking pointed questions about why we were depriving Harold of grandchildren. One cousin's wife even pulled me aside at a barbecue to assure me that fertility problems often come from the woman's side and recommended a special diet she'd read about online. It became clear that Harold had been telling family members that I was preventing Jason from having children, either through career selfishness or some unspecified personal failing. The fertility struggles we'd kept private were now being twisted into gossip that painted me as the villain. The final revelation came in August, when I discovered through our joint credit card statement that Harold had been meeting with Jason for lunch every Wednesday for months. When I casually mentioned these lunches to Jason, thinking he'd simply forgotten to tell me, the color drained from his face. He swore me to secrecy, Jason admitted after several uncomfortable moments. He's been telling me things about our finances, claiming you've been hiding spending from me. He said he's seen your shopping bags in the car, receipts for jewelry and designer clothes. He showed me credit inquiries in your name, said you were planning to leave me and wanted to make sure I was protected. I was stunned. Jason, you know none of that is true. We go over our expenses together every month. I haven't bought anything expensive without discussing it with you first. I know, he said, running his hands through his hair in distress. I never really believed him, but he was so convincing, had so many details, it made me start checking our accounts more carefully. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. That night, as Jason slept fitfully beside me, I studied his face in the dim light filtering through our curtains. The stress of the past year had taken a visible toll. He'd lost weight, the circles under his eyes had darkened, and he'd developed a nervous habit of checking his phone constantly for messages from his father. His doctor had prescribed medication for anxiety and insomnia, conditions he'd never experienced before. I suggested we consider moving, perhaps back to the city or even to another state. A fresh start, away from Harold's constant presence. Jason was reluctant, worried about his parents aging without him nearby and about leaving his position at the firm. But I could see he was tempted by the prospect of peace. Before we could make any decisions, I made a disturbing discovery. While using Jason's laptop to print some documents for work, mine was being repaired, I found a folder labeled Divorce Info. Inside were emails between Harold and several divorce attorneys, gathering information about how to build a case against me. There were questions about proving financial misconduct, documenting parental unfitness, and protecting assets prior to filing. Most shocking was an email from Harold to one attorney that read, "My son isn't ready to pursue this yet, but I want all the groundwork laid so we can move quickly when he comes to his senses about his wife." I sat staring at the screen, hands shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. Harold wasn't just interfering in our marriage, he was actively working to end it, without Jason's knowledge or consent. That afternoon, I contacted a lawyer of my own, not to divorce Jason, but to protect myself from whatever Harold might be planning. The attorney, Melissa Garner, listened carefully to my account of the past 8 years. "This is a clear case of alienation of affection," she said when I finished. "He's deliberately trying to drive a wedge between you and your husband. Document everything, gather all financial records showing your contributions to the marriage, and we'll develop a strategy to protect you both." As our anniversary approached, I worked with Melissa to compile a comprehensive portfolio, financial statements showing my contributions to our household, documentation of Harold's interference, and evidence of the steps he'd taken to undermine our marriage. I wasn't planning to use it unless absolutely necessary, but after discovering Harold's divorce research, I needed to be prepared. Our 10th anniversary fell on a Saturday in late September. I had originally envisioned a romantic weekend getaway, perhaps to the coastal bed and breakfast where we'd spend our honeymoon. But as the date approached, Jason suggested we celebrate with dinner at Maison Laurent, an upscale French restaurant downtown. "We should invite my parents," he added tentatively over breakfast, 3 weeks before the date. "Dad's been asking about our plans, and it might be a good opportunity to smooth things over. Start fresh." I must have looked as crestfallen as I felt, because Jason quickly reached for my hand. "It's just dinner, Brooke. A few hours. Then we'll have the whole weekend to ourselves, I promise." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Perhaps it was the optimist in me, still believing that relationships could heal with enough effort. Or maybe I was just tired of being cast as the difficult one, the wife who kept Jason from his family. I threw myself into preparations for the perfect anniversary, despite my reservations about including Harold and Susan. I bought a new dress, a deep emerald silk that made my eyes look more green than hazel. I spent hours finding the perfect gift for Jason, a vintage architectural drafting set from the 1920s, similar to one his grandfather had used, enclosed in a hand-restored leather case. Behind these normal anniversary preparations, I was also taking precautionary measures. I met twice more with Melissa to finalize my documentation portfolio. She helped me organize everything chronologically, with a summary page highlighting the pattern of interference. "I hope you never need to use this," she said, helping me transfer the documents to a sleek, professional-looking envelope. "But if Harold is planning something for your anniversary dinner, as you suspect, you'll be prepared." The day of our anniversary arrived with golden autumn sunshine and a crisp breeze that hinted at the coming winter. I spent the morning at a spa, trying to relax with a massage and facial that did little to ease the knot of anxiety in my stomach. Something about Harold's recent behavior, a smug satisfaction in his tone during our last family dinner, knowing glances exchanged with Susan, had triggered my internal warning system. By 6 o'clock, I was dressed and ready, the protective envelope tucked safely in my handbag alongside Jason's gift. Jason looked handsome in his charcoal suit, though the jacket hung a bit looser than it had a year ago. As he fastened his watch, a wedding gift from me, he caught me staring. "What is it?" he asked, smiling. "Just remembering how lucky I felt walking down the aisle toward you," I replied honestly. "No matter what happens, Jason, I want you to know these 10 years have been the best of my life." His smile faltered slightly at my serious tone. "Hey, it's our anniversary. Nothing bad is going to happen. Let's just enjoy the evening, okay?" I nodded, forcing brightness into my voice. "You're right. Let's make it one to remember." Maison Laurent was elegant without being stuffy, white tablecloths, soft lighting from crystal chandeliers, and discreet service. Harold and Susan were already seated when we arrived, Harold resplendent in a custom suit that he mentioned twice was fresh from my London tailor. Susan kissed my cheek with genuine warmth. Despite enabling her husband's behavior, she had always been kind to me in her passive way. "Happy anniversary, you too," she said, handing over a beautifully wrapped package. 10 years. I can hardly believe it. "Yes, quite an achievement," Harold added, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Time flies, doesn't it?" Something in his tone sent a chill down my spine. The first half of dinner progressed pleasantly enough. We ordered champagne and shared memories from the wedding. Even Harold seemed to be on good behavior, limiting himself to just one comment about how extravagant our reception had been. After the main course, as the waiter cleared our plates, Harold clinked his knife against his water glass. The tables nearby quieted, and he stood, commanding attention in the way successful businessmen often do. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, lifting his wine glass. "To Jason and Brooke on their 10th anniversary." I relaxed slightly. Perhaps I had been paranoid. Maybe this dinner really was just a celebration. Then Harold continued speaking. "You know, when Jason first brought Brooke home, I had my concerns. I warned him that marrying so young could be a mistake, that he should focus on his career before settling down. But my son has always been headstrong when he wants something." Beside me, Jason shifted uncomfortably. The nearby diners, initially smiling at what they assumed would be a heartwarming toast, began exchanging awkward glances. 10 years later, Harold went on, "I have to say my concerns weren't unfounded. I've watched my brilliant son work himself to exhaustion while his wife builds her little party planning business. I've seen him sacrifice his dreams of a family, a proper home, the future he deserves." "Dad," Jason interrupted, his voice tight. "This isn't the place." "No, son, it needs to be said." Harold reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "I promised myself I would give you one last anniversary gift, the gift of freedom." With a flourish, he slid the envelope across the table toward Jason. "I've taken the liberty of consulting with top divorce attorneys. Everything's prepared. All you need to do is sign." The restaurant had gone completely silent. At nearby tables, patrons were openly staring, some in horror, others with the barely concealed interest of those witnessing a spectacular car crash. A waiter hovered uncertainly at the edge of our table, water pitcher in hand, clearly debating whether to intervene. Susan's face had drained of color. "Harold," she whispered. what have you done? Jason hadn't moved. He stared at the envelope as if it might bite him. With hands that I forced to remain steady, I reached out and opened it myself. Inside were divorce papers, already filled out with Jason's information as the petitioner. There were yellow sticky tabs indicating where he should sign. The grounds listed were financial misconduct and irreconcilable differences. "I've documented everything," Harold said, his voice smug with satisfaction. "The secret spending, the failed business investments, the reason you two don't have children yet. My attorney says it's an airtight case." I looked up from the papers to see Harold watching me, naked triumph in his eyes. He thought he'd won. After 10 years of trying to separate us, he believed this public humiliation would be the final blow to our marriage. Beside me, Jason still hadn't spoken. His face was a mask of shock and confusion. I took a deep breath, placed the divorce papers carefully back in their envelope, and reached for my purse. The leather of my handbag felt cool against my fingertips as I methodically unclasped it, every movement deliberate. The restaurant remained eerily silent around us, the clink of silverware and murmur of conversation from other tables completely ceased. Even the soft background music seemed to have paused, as if the entire establishment was holding its breath. Harold watched me with the satisfied smile of a chess player who believes he's executed a perfect checkmate. Susan's hands twisted nervously in her lap, her eyes darting between her husband and son. The waiter had retreated to a safe distance but remained within earshot, fascination evident on his face despite his professional attempt at discretion. "Harold," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt, "I'm curious about something. Did you actually discuss this with Jason, or did you take it upon yourself to plan his divorce without his knowledge?" Harold's smile didn't waver. "My son has difficulty seeing what's best for him when it comes to you. Sometimes a father needs to take matters into his own hands." "I see," I replied. "So these attorneys you consulted, they were aware they were preparing divorce papers for someone who hadn't actually requested them?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Harold's face, quickly replaced by his usual confidence. "Technicalities. Jason has expressed his frustrations about the marriage many times. To you, perhaps," I said. "But not to me." I turned to Jason, whose face had gone from shocked white to angry red as the reality of his father's actions sank in. "Jason, in the 10 years we've been married, have you ever told me you wanted a divorce?" Jason finally found his voice. "Of course not." He turned to his father. "Dad, what the hell are you doing? I never said I wanted to divorce Brooke. I've never even spoken to these attorneys." Harold waved a dismissive hand. "I saved you the trouble. You're too conflict avoidant to do what needs to be done. I've watched you becoming more miserable every year. The stress is destroying your health. This marriage is killing you, and if you won't act, I will." "By ambushing us at our anniversary dinner?" Jason's voice rose slightly, and he made a visible effort to control it. "By humiliating my wife in public? This is crossing every line." Harold's expression hardened. "I have documentation proving financial mismanagement. Brooke has been making large cash withdrawals for months. She's been meeting with someone named Melissa regularly. There are unexplained charges at hotels. The signs are all there if you'd open your eyes." A moment of stunned silence followed this accusation. Several diners at nearby tables were now openly watching, some with phones partially raised as if debating whether to record the drama unfolding before them. "Those cash withdrawals were for your birthday gift," Jason said slowly. "A rare first edition book on architectural theory that I've been paying for in installments because it cost $3,000. I wanted it to be a surprise." Harold faltered momentarily but recovered quickly. "That doesn't explain the other meetings, the hotels." "Enough." I didn't shout the word, but it cut through his accusations like a knife. I placed my hands flat on the table and looked Harold directly in the eyes. "For 10 years, I have tried to be a good wife to Jason and a respectful daughter-in-law to you, despite your constant interference, criticism, and manipulation. I've kept quiet about many things out of love for my husband and respect for his relationship with his parents. I reached into my purse and withdrew my own envelope, cream-colored, heavy stock, embossed with a subtle monogram. Beside me, Jason looked confused. This wasn't part of any plan we had discussed. But you're right about one thing, Harold, I continued, sliding my envelope across the table toward him. I have been meeting with someone named Melissa. Melissa Garner, my attorney. And I have been gathering documentation of my own. Harold's smug expression faltered as he stared at the envelope. What's this supposed to be? Open it, I said quietly. Susan placed a restraining hand on Harold's arm. Harold, perhaps this isn't the place. He shook her off and snatched up the envelope, tearing it open with far less finesse than he'd demonstrated with his divorce papers presentation. His hand stilled as he began to read the first page of the document inside. What I have documented, I explained for the benefit of Jason and Susan, is a systematic campaign by Harold to interfere in our marriage, alienate Jason's affections, and ultimately destroy our relationship. Harold's face had begun to drain of color as he flipped through the pages. This is nothing but. The first section, I continued calmly, contains detailed financial records showing my contributions to our marriage. Every deposit I've made to our joint accounts. Every mortgage payment I've covered when Jason was between projects. The startup costs for my business that I paid from my own savings to avoid risking our joint finances. Jason reached for the documents, and Harold reluctantly slid them toward his son, who began reviewing them with an architect's attention to detail. The second section, I went on, provides a documented timeline of Harold's interference in our marriage. 8 years of unannounced visits, financial sabotage, and attempts to control our lives. It includes dates, times, and witnesses to many of these incidents. Harold's face had turned from pale to mottled red. This is ridiculous. Susan, tell them how ridiculous this is. Susan sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on her water glass. The third section contains statements from friends and family members who have witnessed Harold's behavior firsthand. People who saw him belittle me at family gatherings, undermine my business, or attempt to create conflict between Jason and me. Jason looked up from the documents, his expression a mixture of shock and growing anger. Dad, is this true? Did you really tell the Hendersons that Brooke was preventing us from having children? Before Harold could answer, I continued. Section 4 includes medical documentation connecting Jason's recent health issues, his anxiety, insomnia, and weight loss, to family stress. His doctor has specifically noted the correlation between his symptoms and increased contact with his father. You had no right to include my medical information, Jason said, but there was no anger in his voice, only a quiet realization. I'm sorry, I replied softly. But it's important to show the physical toll this situation has taken on you. I turned back to Harold, whose hands were now gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Section 5 contains records of the failed investment Harold pushed you into without my knowledge. $15,000 of our savings, gone because Harold convinced you his friend's app would revolutionize real estate. That investment failed because of market conditions beyond anyone's control, Harold protested weakly. The company never had proper funding or a viable product, I countered. Something a basic internet search would have revealed, had you been interested in actually helping us rather than controlling our finances. I saved the most damning evidence for last. The final section, Harold, is what I think you'll find most interesting. It contains evidence that you've been meeting with divorce attorneys without Jason's knowledge or consent. It includes photographs of you entering these offices on at least 6 different occasions. At this, Susan finally broke her silence. Harold, you promised me you were just getting financial advice for them. Harold ignored his wife, his eyes locked on mine in a mixture of fury and disbelief. How did you get these photographs? Have you been having me followed? After I found the divorce research on Jason's laptop, research he knew nothing about, I became concerned about what else you might be planning. So yes, I hired someone to document your activities. I kept my voice level, though my heart was pounding. What kind of father plans his son's divorce behind his back? What kind of man tries to destroy his son's marriage out of some twisted need for control? The restaurant had become so silent I could hear Harold's ragged breathing across the table. A few tables away, someone whispered "holy shit" just loudly enough to be heard. Jason slowly closed the envelope and looked at his father. 10 years of manipulation, lies, and control were suddenly laid bare between them. When he spoke, his voice was unnaturally calm. "All this time," he said, "I've been defending you to Brooke. Making excuses for your behavior. Telling her you meant well despite your methods." He shook his head slowly. "But this, planning my divorce without even talking to me? Trying to destroy my marriage as an anniversary gift?" Harold found his voice at last. "Son, you don't understand. She's turned you against me. These so-called documents are probably fabricated." "Stop." Jason's command cut through Harold's protests. "Just stop talking, Dad." With deliberate movements, Jason picked up the divorce papers Harold had presented, held them up for a moment, then tore them in half. Then quarters. Then eighths, letting the pieces fall to the table like confetti. "We're done here," he said, standing and extending his hand to me. "Brooke, shall we go home?" Harold surged to his feet. "If you leave with her now, don't expect." "Harold, enough." Susan's voice rang out with unprecedented force. Everyone at the table turned to her in shock. In 20 years of family gatherings, I had never heard her raise her voice. "You promised me you were helping them. You swore you were just looking out for Jason's interests. But this..." She gestured at the torn divorce papers and my documentation. "This is obsession. You've been trying to break them up since the day they met." Harold stared at his wife as if she'd grown a second head. "Susan, you know very well." "I know I've let this go on too long," she interrupted. "I've made excuses for you, just like Jason has. But no more." She stood, gathering her purse and wrap. "I'll be staying at Diane's tonight. Don't call me." Harold watched in stunned silence as his wife walked out of the restaurant, head held high. Then he turned back to us, his expression darkening from shock to fury. "This isn't over," he snarled, grabbing his coat. "You'll regret this public humiliation." He stormed out, leaving the scattered pieces of the divorce papers behind. The restaurant remained silent for several seconds after Harold's departure. Then, startlingly, someone at a nearby table began to applaud. Others joined in, the applause spreading until most of the dining room was clapping. The restaurant manager approached, looking both concerned and a bit impressed. "Your dinner is on the house," he said quietly. "I've never seen anything like that in 20 years of running this place." Jason looked at me, a mixture of emotions playing across his face: shock, sadness, relief, and something that looked a lot like admiration. "Happy anniversary?" I offered with a small, uncertain smile. He laughed, a short, surprised sound, then leaned down and kissed me. "Let's go home," he whispered. "We have a lot to talk about." Hand in hand, we walked out of the restaurant and into the cool September night, leaving behind the torn papers and a decade of manipulation. For the first time in years, I felt like we could breathe freely again. The drive home from the restaurant was silent, but not uncomfortable. Jason drove with one hand on the wheel, the other holding mine across the center console. Occasionally he would squeeze my fingers, as if reassuring himself I was still there. The weight of what had just happened hung between us, not as a barrier but as a shared experience we were still processing. Our house was dark when we arrived, the porch light I'd left on casting long shadows across the front lawn. Inside, Jason loosened his tie and sank onto our living room couch, staring at the envelope I'd presented to his father, which he'd brought with him. "How long have you been putting this together?" he asked finally. I sat beside him, kicking off my heels. "Actively collecting documentation?" "About 6 months. But I've been keeping track of incidents for years." I hesitated, then added, "I never intended to use it. It was insurance, I guess." A way to maintain my sanity when things got bad. Jason nodded slowly. And Melissa? She's really your attorney? Yes. After I found the divorce research on your laptop, I got scared. I needed to know my options if your father convinced you to go through with it. He winced at that. I had no idea he'd done that research. You have to believe me. I do, I said simply. If I thought you were behind it, I wouldn't be here. Jason opened the envelope and began going through the contents more carefully than he had at the restaurant. I watched his face as he read through the timeline of his father's interference, the testimonials from friends, the financial records. His expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally a profound sadness. There's so much here I didn't know about, he said, turning a page. All these conversations he had with you when I wasn't around, the things he said. He looked up at me. Why didn't you tell me it was this bad? I chose my words carefully. I told you about some of it. The worst parts. But you were already so stressed, caught between us. And honestly? Some of it sounds crazy when you say it out loud. Your father implied I'm secretly spending all our money. Your father suggested I'm deliberately not getting pregnant. Without proof, it's just my word against his, and he's your father. Not anymore, Jason said with sudden vehemence. After tonight, he's nothing to me. I placed my hand over his. Don't say that. He's still your father. What he did was terrible, but cutting him off completely is a big decision. Not one you should make tonight. Jason flipped to the section about his health issues, his brow furrowing. My doctor really connected my anxiety to family stress? Yes. Dr. Brennan noted it in your file after you mentioned feeling tense before family gatherings. The weight loss started after we moved closer to your parents. The insomnia got worse after every major conflict with your father. I squeezed his hand. Jason, you've been physically ill from the stress of being torn between us. That's not normal or healthy. He was silent for a long moment. I knew things were tense. I knew my father was difficult. But I never saw the whole pattern until tonight. He closed the envelope and set it on the coffee table. All these years, I thought I was managing this situation, protecting you from the worst of it. But I was failing you. No, I said firmly. You were being a good son and a good husband in an impossible situation. Your father is manipulative and controlling. He's had decades to perfect his techniques on you. Jason ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I knew signaled deep distress. But at what cost? Our marriage has been under constant attack, and I didn't see it clearly until tonight. I defended him. I made excuses. His voice broke slightly. I let him hurt you. I moved closer, wrapping my arms around him. We both did the best we could with an impossible situation. And we're still here. We survived tonight. We survived 10 years of his interference. That says something about us, doesn't it? He pulled back to look at me, his eyes red-rimmed but dry. It says I married someone much stronger than I realized. A small smile touched his lips. That envelope was one hell of an anniversary gift. I laughed, the tension of the evening finally breaking. Not exactly the romantic gesture I had planned. No, but it was exactly what we needed. His expression grew serious again. Brooke, I'm so sorry. For all of it. For not seeing what was happening clearly. For not protecting you better. I don't need protection, I replied. I need partnership. And despite everything, that's what we've had. Your father failed because at the core, we've always been a team. Jason nodded slowly. No more divided loyalties. From now on, you come first. Always. And you need to come first for yourself too, I added gently. Your health, your peace of mind, they matter more than appeasing your father. We talked for hours that night, curled together on the couch like we used to in college, untangling years of manipulation and miscommunication. Jason shared stories from his childhood, patterns of control I'd never fully understood before. I told him about incidents with Harold I'd sheltered him from. It was painful but cathartic, like lancing an infected wound. Around 3 in the morning, exhausted but somehow lighter, we finally went to bed. As I drifted toward sleep, Jason whispered, "I still can't believe you created that whole documentation portfolio without me knowing." "I'm an event planner," I murmured sleepily. "Organizing is what I do." He chuckled and pulled me closer. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." The next morning, reality intruded in the form of 17 missed calls, 12 from Harold and 5 from Susan. We ignored them in favor of coffee and quiet conversation at our kitchen table. "What happens now?" Jason asked, staring into his mug. "That's up to us," I said. "We can change our phone numbers. We can move. We can set firm boundaries and limited contact. Whatever you want to do, I'll support." Jason was quiet for a moment. "I think I need some distance from them. Time to figure out what kind of relationship I want going forward, if any." He looked up at me. "Would you be okay with that? Taking a break from my parents for a while?" "More than okay," I said honestly. "I think it's necessary for both of us." Later that day, Jason sent a brief email to both his parents. "I need space to process what happened. Please do not contact either of us for the foreseeable future. I will reach out when I'm ready." Harold responded immediately with a long, defensive message accusing me of manipulating Jason and threatening legal action for defamation. Jason deleted it without reply. Susan sent a shorter note apologizing for her role in enabling Harold's behavior and promising to respect our boundaries. In the days that followed, we took practical steps to protect our peace. We changed the locks on our house. Jason set up email filters to automatically file messages from his father. We informed friends and family about the situation so they wouldn't inadvertently become conduits for Harold's attempts to contact us. Most significantly, we began looking for a new home, not in panic or flight, but as a deliberate choice to start fresh. We found a Victorian fixer-upper in a historic district across town, far from Harold's usual haunts but still within Jason's commuting range. The renovation project gave us something positive to focus on, a way to channel our energy into creation rather than damage control. 2 weeks after the restaurant confrontation, Jason had his first session with a therapist specializing in family trauma. I joined him occasionally for couples sessions, but mostly this was his journey to understand and heal from decades of his father's manipulation. As for me, I threw myself into growing my business. Without Harold's constant criticism and interference, I found new confidence in my abilities. I landed 2 major corporate clients within a month and hired my first assistant. Success was the sweetest revenge, though I kept that particular thought to myself. Gradually, Jason's health improved. The anxiety medication was reduced, then eliminated. His sleep normalized. The weight began to return to his frame. One morning, as we had breakfast on our new porch, I realized I was seeing the return of the man I'd fallen in love with in college, thoughtful, creative, and unburdened by constant stress. "You're staring," he said, smiling over his orange juice. "Just appreciating the view," I replied. "You look happy." He reached for my hand across the table. "I am happy. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe." It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. There were difficult days when Jason struggled with guilt over cutting contact with his parents. There were moments when Harold's absence at holidays or birthdays felt strange despite the relief it brought. Healing isn't linear, as Jason's therapist often reminded us. But with each passing week, we grew stronger, as individuals and as a couple. The envelope that had been meant as a desperate last defense had become, unexpectedly, the first step toward a healthier future. The night after the restaurant confrontation changed us forever, though the full impact wouldn't become clear until months later. Jason and I sat in our living room until dawn, having the conversation we should have had years ago. There were tears, from both of us, and moments of anger not at each other but at the situation we'd allowed to develop. I should have protected you better, Jason said repeatedly, his voice heavy with regret. And I should have been more direct about how serious the situation was getting, I acknowledged. We both made mistakes. The important thing is what we do now. What we did was rebuild, not just our relationship, but our entire lives. The process began with small, immediate changes. We screened our calls. We changed our locks. We took a weekend getaway to a cabin in the mountains with no cell service, giving ourselves space to breathe and connect without external pressure. Jason started seeing Dr. Marlene Torres, a therapist specializing in family trauma, on a weekly basis. Initially reluctant, "I'm not the one with the problem," he'd argued. He quickly recognized the value in having a neutral professional help him untangle years of manipulation. Dr. Torres says I've been conditioned since childhood to prioritize my father's emotional needs above my own, he told me after his third session. Apparently it's common in children of narcissistic parents. I never even considered that label for him before. I joined Jason for monthly couple sessions, where Dr. Torres helped us develop healthier communication patterns and strategies for supporting each other. She also helped us plan for eventual, limited contact with Jason's parents, though we all agreed that would come only after substantial healing had occurred. Boundaries aren't punishment, she reminded us. They're protection. You're not cutting contact to hurt Harold, but to give yourselves the space to heal. During this period, Harold made several attempts to breach our boundaries. He showed up at our house unannounced 3 times before finally accepting that we wouldn't answer the door. He sent a certified letter threatening legal action for defamation and alienation that our lawyer advised us to ignore. He even tried contacting my clients, though thankfully most recognized his behavior as inappropriate and informed me immediately. Susan, on the other hand, respected our request for space. She sent a single handwritten letter apologizing for her role as an enabler and expressing hope for eventual reconciliation on healthier terms. Jason read it several times but wasn't ready to respond. "Maybe someday," he said, carefully storing the letter in his desk. But not yet. The most visible change in our lives came 2 months after the restaurant confrontation, when we closed on a new house, a 1920s colonial with good bones but outdated everything, located in a historic district 15 miles from Harold and Susan. The renovation became our therapy, a tangible way to build something beautiful together. Jason designed a home office for me with built-in shelving and a bay window overlooking a small garden. I surprised him with a dedicated drafting room where he could work on personal architectural projects. Weekends were spent painting walls, refinishing hardwood floors, and gradually turning the house into our sanctuary. As winter turned to spring, I noticed Jason smiling more. The furrow between his brows that had become permanent in recent years gradually smoothed. He slept through the night without medication. His clothes began to fit properly again as his appetite returned. My business flourished without Harold's constant criticism eroding my confidence. I expanded from corporate events to include luxury weddings, hired 2 part-time assistants, and even rented a small office space downtown. For the first time in years, I felt fully capable and creative in my work. 6 months after the restaurant confrontation, almost to the day, Jason received a call from his mother. He took it in his home office while I pretended not to hover nervously in the hallway. "She wants to meet for coffee," he told me afterward, his expression a mixture of wariness and hope. "Just her, not Dad. She says they're in counseling, both together and separately." He looked at me questioningly. "What do you think?" "I think it's your decision," I said carefully. "Do you want to see her?" He nodded slowly. "I think I do. Dr. Torres and I have talked about how Mom was both an enabler and a victim. I'm still angry with her, but I miss her too." Jason met Susan at a cafe midway between our houses. He came home 2 hours later, emotionally exhausted but glad they'd talked. "She's different," he reported. "More direct. She apologized without making excuses. Said she should have protected me from Dad's controlling behavior instead of teaching me to accommodate it." Susan had also shared that Harold was seeing a therapist specializing in narcissistic personality traits, though his progress was slow and inconsistent. "He still doesn't fully accept that he did anything wrong," Jason said. "But at least he's going." That first meeting led to cautious, occasional contact with Susan, lunch every few weeks, brief phone calls, eventually an invitation to see our new house. She came alone, brought a houseplant as a gift, and made no mention of Harold or reconciliation. It was a start. A year after the infamous anniversary dinner, we held a housewarming party in our fully renovated home. Friends, colleagues, and selected family members gathered in our backyard for barbecue and drinks. Susan attended, slightly awkward but clearly making an effort. Harold was not invited. Late in the evening, as guests were beginning to leave, Susan pulled me aside. "I want to thank you," she said quietly. "Not just for including me today, but for what you did at the restaurant last year." "I didn't do it to hurt anyone," I replied. "I just couldn't let it continue." "I know. And neither could I, once I saw the full picture." She twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd noticed before. "Harold and I are still together, but things are different now. I have my own bank accounts. I'm taking art classes. I don't ask permission anymore." A small smile touched her lips. "It's not perfect, but it's better." As summer turned to fall again, Jason and I began discussing something we'd put on hold for years: starting a family. After 2 previous miscarriages and the stress of Harold's interference, we'd stopped trying. Now, with new stability in our lives, the possibility felt right again. "I'm not getting any younger," I joked one evening as we sat on our new porch swing. "True, you are practically ancient at 35, Jason teased back, then grew serious. "But are we ready? Really ready?" I thought about everything we'd been through, the pain, the growth, the rebuilding. "I think we're stronger now than we've ever been. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." 2 months later, when the pregnancy test came back positive, we decided to keep the news private until the 2nd trimester. The only exception was Dr. Torres, who helped us plan how and when to share the news with Jason's parents. When we finally told them, at a carefully neutral restaurant with clear time boundaries, Harold's reaction surprised us both. Instead of the criticism or excessive enthusiasm I'd expected, he simply said, "Congratulations. I hope I'll be allowed to know my grandchild." It was the closest thing to humility I'd ever heard from him. Jason answered evenly, "That depends on your continued respect for our boundaries, Dad." The road ahead wouldn't be perfectly smooth. Harold was still Harold, albeit a somewhat tempered version, but we had the tools now to maintain healthy boundaries. More importantly, we had each other, a partnership tested by fire and proven resilient. On our 11th anniversary, we celebrated quietly at home. No fancy restaurant, no family drama, just takeout from our favorite Thai place, eaten on the floor of our nursery in progress while debating paint colors and baby names. "Did you ever imagine, when you put together that envelope, that we'd end up here?" Jason asked, dipping a spring roll in peanut sauce. I looked around the room, at the crib we'd assembled together and the children's books already filling a small bookshelf. I thought about the journey that had brought us here, the pain, the confrontation, the healing. "No," I admitted. "I was just trying to protect myself. To protect us." I couldn't see past the immediate crisis. "Well, I'm glad your envelope left my father speechless," Jason said, raising his water glass in a toast. "Here's to the best decision we ever made, choosing each other, every day, no matter what." I clinked my glass against his. To choosing each other. That night, as Jason slept peacefully beside me, I reflected on how close we'd come to losing everything. How a single moment of courage, pulling out that envelope in the restaurant, had changed the course of our lives. Sometimes the hardest confrontations lead to the greatest healing. Sometimes you have to face the worst to find your way to the best. Have you ever had to stand up to a toxic family member to protect your relationship? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you found this story helpful, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is set boundaries with the people you love. Thank you for listening, and I wish you all the strength and courage you need for your own journey.